Hi, this is Barbara Sanders, and this is my YouTube channel, Sacred Metamorphoses. And I'm going to be talking with Randy Mack today. And you can subscribe for free down below. And if you want to learn more about me, you can go to cosmic-mystic.com. Um, this is going to be an interesting conversation because I just learned some things about Randy that I didn't know. And I'll tell you a few things first, but first I drew an oracle card from this book this morning for us. And this is Rosie Aronson, The Wisdom Keepers Oracle Card Book, 64 Faces of Awakening. And I love oracle cards because I can draw one every day and read about it in the book and then look at my card. She's an artist as well, and she works with Richard Rudd with the Gene Keys and does the dream art journey, and she's going to do some more things. But anyway, this is the card I drew, and it is called dynamism. That's dynamism. And when I drew it, the card, I didn't draw the art. When I drew the card, I was like, that's it. That's Randy and me, dynamism. So, pretty card. I'll just read you one little thing that Richard Rudd said about this 39th gene key. He says, if you do what you truly love, you will unleash your creative dynamism. And the more creative you are, the more energy becomes available to you. And that's what I view about Randy Mack. So I'm going to say some things about you, Randy, and then you can say whatever you want about you, and we'll talk some. Um, I've known Randy since I don't know when, a while back, but I remember in 2018, after reading Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, I immediately called up Randy and said, I need a consultation. And he gave me one, which I want to thank you for, Randy. That was very important that you and I talked about that book. Um, he has written a book that just got published this year that you can buy on Amazon or elsewhere. And it's called, is this your first book, Randy?
Yes. Yes.
And how old are you now?
78.
Okay, great. 78 years old, his first book, and maybe I can do that. It's called The New Era of Radiant Aging: Love, Sex, Psychedelics, and Wonderment. And it's just, oh, aging's been on my mind lately, of course, and so this is wonderful. And what I like to do is pick out a few favorite words that I read about you, and these are some of the words. Adventure of the emergence of conscious embodiment. How to remove the deeply imprinted dysfunctional patterns that control our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, plus opening up to ever more exquisite realms. You also use the term integral worldview and using potent life-enhancing, although often illegal substances, which can raise consciousness or increase consciousness, expanding, and heart healing experiences to us. You talk about the mature, well-integrated life, and the goal is radiant aging, which we're trying to be role models of, with wisdom and grace while dealing with difficult and even tragic issues. You also say that the senior years can be our crowning glory of our lives. So, Randy, tell us whatever you'd like to tell us about yourself and then your book, and we can go from there. Thank you for being here.
Well, I'm a 78-year-old unrepentant hippie, although I cut my hair a long time ago and haven't had bell bottoms. But yeah, the basic values that culture, I carried through, and as all the things we've learned over the last 55 years or so. Um, I wrote this book because I was thinking things that I thought were valuable that I didn't see anybody else talking about. And of course, maybe many other people talking about it because it's nothing unique, but nonetheless, I was moved to do this. And at first, I called the book Ecstatic Aging. And then I realized that's not descriptive enough. It's a little kind of flighty. And when I talk about the new era of radiant aging, I really am talking about something that is new. And I will get in and talk about it a little bit more, the details. But there are several features and things in the world that are allowing this generation, the boomer generation, to have a quality of old age that's never been possible to any generation in the history of the world. And that's maybe extravagant, but it's not. It's true, and I'll talk about it. Yes. So there's three basic premises to the book, and one of them is that I'm convinced that there's a natural gestation rate as we get into our 70s that allows us a increased sensitivity of subtle energy that can allow us to have a deeper level of intimacy physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually than we could have when we were younger, no matter how developed we might otherwise be. Um, and that, of course, the increased sensitivity is interesting because it can make good things better and bad things worse. We do know that older people tend to be happier, but we also know a lot of old people that are quite grumpy, you know. So the key is to really going through healing processes. So um, in my life, I had some very traumatic, extremely traumatic events that were pre-verbal, and I had done starting in the '60s, and you know, I was an alcoholic in college, and I thought all spiritual things, religious things, were just stupid. And then in the summer of '68, I ended up not going to law school and dropping out and becoming a hippie and all that went with that. Um, One of my very first LSD trips, that first summer of '68, I saw myself who I really was. Up to that moment, I thought I was fine, in spite of all the obvious problems I had. I just couldn't see them. And on that trip, I saw how I was in denial about alcohol. I saw how I was really immature about relationships with females. I saw I was using my high SAT scores that feel I was smarter than other people. And I just saw it all for the ego stuff it was. It was a really very shocking experience. In some ways, I can say that's a trip I've never come back down from. Um, but fortunately, it was the '60s, and this whole new worldview, they sometimes call it postmodern. All that term has gotten sort of degraded and turned. A better term is, egalitarian, pluralistic. And, it's, I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes more, but that's just one of the areas we'll talk about. Mm-hmm. And so, there's these three things. So there's this sense of aging that allows us this increased sensitivity. So my experience was that I started the late '60s, by working in a metaphysical bookstore, which is good because I got to see the wide range of teachings. Although there's nothing like now, but we had, the yoga stuff and, Alan Watts and Krishnamurti and, different, sorts of things. Some of which have great value and real wisdom, and some which were, kind of silly, but, so be it. And then, through the '60s, I went through having a family and the responsibility came with that, and having children. Did various, talk therapy, group therapy, and this is over several decades. I'm talking here now. And ended up doing men's work in the early '90s, and did some Gestalt therapy, did chakra healing, did shamanic healing, and through all this period, I was using these substances. I coined the term. Well, I think this is really clever, but pardon me, but life enhancing substances. Because there's no term that I can find that can cover psychedelics, MDMA, cannabis, ibogaine, and MMCs, and some others, and because those are, I'm talking about, caffeine may be a life enhancing substance to a degree, but not one that will probably radically change your life. So, I started using these. At first, it was just sort of willy-nilly tripping. One time I took what would be 2,000 micrograms of LSD, which, if you have any idea what that world is, that's a huge fucking heroic dose. And that was the dose when I discovered for absolute certainty that the universe is the mind of God, that consciousness is the ultimate reality, and always has been, always will be. It's all there can be. One of my favorite quotes from a Christian thinker, Darcy, and it was interesting because I looked her up a little bit. She wasn't a fundamentalist type. She'd been around a lot of things and came back in, but it's the most simple quote, and it's the one that every time I say it, I just rush. Is that God comes to us disguised as our daily life. And that's all we'll ever have, all we've ever had, all we ever will have is our daily life. So the question is how to make that of greater use and greater value and greater, and more fun. I mean, I'm all for fun with part of this. I think there's a certain kind of anti-hedonism, anti-sexual thing in sort of the spiritual subculture. And I think maybe the anti-spiritual thing comes from, how crudely sexuality is dealt with in the mainstream society. And so in the book, I discuss a lot of these kinds of practical things. Um, so the first, early in the book, I talk about various things that helped me grow, and various teachers. Samuel Bonder and his Waking Down Mutuality really helped me, and I went through his process and opened my heart to infinity. And it was funny. I started in that moment. I started laughing so hard it sounded like I was choking to death, but just the obviousness that how everything is connected to the heart, and then I lost that sensation, and I spent 5 years trying to get it back, and then one day I realized I'd never lost it. I just lost the rush. So it's all a hippie. I should have known you don't get to keep the rush. But anyways, other things. I worked with Susan Campbell, who's a brilliant therapist and author, and she wrote a book back in the early '80s called The Couple's Journey, which may have been the first book ever published in this culture about using personal growth, from relationships. And although now it's a very, very common thing, but this was like 45 years ago, and it may have been others, but anyway. Later on in the early 2000s, I met her. She just read a book called Getting Real, 10 True Skills to Lead a More Authentic Life. And it's a really useful, good book. And on each of the 10 skills, you have a little self-grading one at the beginning, and, I went through the first one. I said, I do pretty good in that one. The second one, I do pretty good in that one. The third one was, how often have you, not been honest or real because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings? And I was, well, anyway, it went on. A great blessing in my life is I had just this. I've had acts of grace, and I'll get into that more. But in any case, I got to meet her. I ended up being her boyfriend, even though we weren't attracted to each other. And and she wrote a book called Truth in Dating, and that book is dedicated to me. So that looks really my dating summer. Right? Yeah. Yeah, I'd be happy to tell you what's wrong with you. Not quite the way it goes, but it's a blessing, and because I couldn't have got that from just reading the book, and I really got an idea of how to be more real, and that's the key to all of this. How can we be more real with ourselves, and then how can we be more real with others? And then if we can find a partner who can be real with themselves, there seems to be no limit to what we can have, and more than that. So. There's a whole autobiographical section of the book, and it focused mostly around my experiences with these substances. And, it's those are some very wild journeys, and the kind of thing you don't hear too much today when they talk about psychedelics. They talk about personal growth and insights, but boy, there is some cosmic fireworks out there, and so we also learned in the old days that you could have those experiences of spirituality merged with the mind of God and still come back and be a jerk. It's so that you obviously have to do work on other areas. And, my belief is that personal growth, ventures and spiritual ventures sort of act as a stepping stone with each other, that the more you have in one, the more you can have in the other, and they feed into each other. And the book has quite a lot of, information about all of that and what I found useful. And so the substances stuff, I have found that the most potent way of having deep healing of these really deep emotional traumas is using MDMA, ecstasy, Molly with a psychedelic. And the MDMA keeps it more psychological. Adding a psychedelic in there really gives it more power and oomph. And, there's many of us know this. There's a wonderful book called Through the Gateway of the Heart by Sophia Adamson, which was a pseudonym for oh my God, what's his name? Shit. Oh, well, get back to that. Anyway, but it had all these stories about personal growth and healing from these therapists in Northern California who were giving it to them. And I had a history where when I was 30 years old, my wife died after a 2-week illness, and my children were 1.5 and 3 at the time. And there's a whole amazing story in this book about the things that happened just before she went into this period, during this 2-week period, and after. And it's a great story. I don't know if I should, maybe somewhere else, but it's a really good story, but take about 10 minutes. And I always thought I should enter some kind of storytelling contest. I think it'd have people totally in tears. But just, a whole series of things are acts of grace that happened. And, you know, I think it'll be, if you want to follow up on me, there's other places you'll find that on. And, but anyway, yeah, so these personal growth stuff. And at one point it was 2018. I've been in a relationship for 10 years. It wasn't working. I wanted to try to save the relationship if I could. And I thought maybe if I heal myself as much as possible, this other person will be able to see their own woundedness. And even if that didn't work, I'd be better for what came next. So I took 4 journeys, and yeah, each one of them worked on heal what was my goal. One was my father. That experience, I won't go into details, was the most horrible thing I ever experienced in my life. I had a period in that journey where I literally went into hell, and I knew I was there forever in that moment, and that was horrific. But he went through that, and but using a substance, I'm going to focus on the thing with my wife because she had been dead 10 years by since she died in 77, so I was 87. I'd been dating women a little bit, but it was casual, more or less, and well, less. And then I met this incredibly wonderful woman, and she was brilliant. Our sex was unbelievably great for the first moment. She was funny and smart and just a wonderful, amazing person. And I could not open my heart to her. I just could not open my heart. And it became clear and obvious, and she left. It was shortly after that I got that book, Through the Gateway of the Heart. Because at that point I just knew, MDMA is a party drug and a dance drug. And so I took a hit of MDMA and 100 mics of LSD and had a picture of my wife on the wall. And I sat there, and an hour in, this wave of grief hit me. This deep grief just came out of my guts. So I just wailed, this anguish, deep wailing sound. And I did that with every breath for almost 3.5 hours, probably around 700 times. And my daughters were teenagers and young teenagers. They were across the hall in their bedrooms. I'm glad they didn't hear it because it would be very hard to explain it to them if they'd come into the room, but they didn't. The next night, I had a long dream contact with my wife, which is, who knows what dreams there are, but it was really precious. And a few months later, I met this other woman, and I fell in love. And so that was the first of these kind of experiences. And then I just went through life having children, had 5-step children for a while, all these various changes in life and working. I became a rolfer, and it's been my life work for the last 46 years, and it's been a real blessing. And anyway, so again, thinking about these tools for healing traumas. When I was 18 months old, my 3-year-old sister died, and my parents were guilty. My mother tried to abort her chemically, and she'd been born, I don't know what word you use, but damaged. I had not heard this story until shortly before my mother died, which was shortly after my wife died, but whatever. I looked at a picture of her, and you can see this sort of bulbous forehead, pinched-in eyes, saucers like limbs. And so my mother was full of guilt. And she was also an alcoholic. And up to 18 months, you're still part of your mother's energy field in some systems. And I think I really just felt that and just my own. And when she was 3, she started screaming. My father picked her up and shook her. She went into a coma and died the next day. Oh. And I assumed, in the way you are at that age, it was all me, that I had done this horrible thing. I was a horrible person. If they ever found out, they would kill me. And I grew up with that. Again, not the way it's imprinted is pre-verbally. So anyway, one of these trips in 2018, I decided to go into that, and I was pushing into it because I just know how horrible this might be. But I've noticed these trips, sometimes you have to go and feel the pain of them, and sometimes you can have a healing experience without feeling that pain. Mm-hmm. What makes a difference, I don't know. But in this case, I was prepared as much as I could be. I kept pushing into it. I would get kind of distracted. I push it. I said, no, I'm going to go there. And then Christ came into my mind, and he came to me the day after my wife died. At that point, he came as Jesus. And I think he told me that my wife had come to this life to have the spiritual obligation to have these children, and told me other things about my life and her, and promised the children would be okay. And also told me he didn't care if I went to church or read the Bible. He just cared that I have a kind heart and be good to his people. It's everyone. anyway, so, go ahead, several decades. And there I was and going into this experience, and that his presence was again. And the first time I called himself Jesus, which was important because the next day at the funeral, I talked about Jesus coming to me, which made everything to my in-laws, and my spirituality never cared much about Jesus because I thought they make such a big deal about the virgin birth and the miracles, which is to me, pretty irrelevant. In this case, it was just the Christ, and he came into my mind, this pregnant presence, and he said, "You don't have to go there. That's not in you anymore." And I said, "It's an amazing rush." And anyway, so um,
What a gift to you.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a blessing, and but it did not turn me into some kind of Jesus freak. So and that relation ended, and 2 months later, I met Marianne, the great love of my life, and I could not have written this book or had the life I've had without that the last 7 years. And
7. Well, I know you moved away from Nashville and you've been in
yeah,
Maryland
yeah, I
since.
moved here and I'm living in Maryland now with her. And so I want to go back to this is kind of autobiographical stuff. So I want to go back to may come back to this some, but this idea of stages of development. I got this from Ken Wilber in the Integral Community. And so briefly, elaborated in the book, um, half a dozen times or so in human history and prehistory, an entire new way of thinking, being, valuing is coming to the world. We don't know where or why. Each stage we've encompassed a larger group of people as our people. And you go back to, tribal things like American Indians or Europeans, 10,000 years ago or something, they only identify with a small tribe or clan. And so when, the American Indians would just brutally, tortures a captive, it didn't make them bad people. If they were like us now, that we have this horrific, but they weren't. They were just, their hard wiring was just that people's hide outside their clan had no more value than a rattlesnake. And they often thought to cause more pain, even sometimes for themselves, is really what is, fed God and created some kind of balance, in the universe. And, but anyway, so, and then larger civilizations came along and, 10, 12,000 years ago. So you might identify with all your fellow Sumerians or Assyrians, but it was still all right to massacre the others. And then we had the 10 Commandments. I think there's some other things like that I'm not quite sure about. But so that first one's like all about first person, it's all about us, And so the 10 Commandments was second person. It was like about others as well. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness, there, etc. Oh, a quick footnote. I read about somebody was, anyway, there's a book called Jesus Speaks. And uh, anyway, uh, this woman channeled Jesus, or he came to her art studio. It's a whole other story. It's in the book. Um, and Love Without End, Jesus Speaks. And she painted his portrait over 3 months, and the paint always dried every day. She had to wait a couple of days with the oil paints, and they talked, and she took notes. But he went through some of the translation issues. I love this one. The sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. He also said it means, thou shalt not destroy others' dreams. So much more profound, thing. Anyway, so of course some people did well with that, treating others as they, should, but of course a lot of people didn't. But still, it was even the idea was new. Then in the 1600s, 1700s in Europe and America primarily, modernity came into the world. It's something called the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. It brought forth a third person perspective. What is the it that's in and around us? And people start to see the world in a new way. So it brought forth science, technology, and also the idea of democracy, because that was new in the world. The traditional worldview inherently is hardwired to want a strong leader to make them feel safe, and it's easy. They suffer from fear. It's easy for them to feel fearful, and they can't see any change in the world that isn't bad. And I just define MAGA, you know. But in each of these stages, there's the healthy versions and the unhealthy versions. So um, anyway, modernity brought a lot of really improved the quality of the world. Although we also got atom bombs, but also got like many, 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 many more people living better lives. And so in the 60s, this new one came in, and it brought something along with the obvious things, the care for minorities, feminism, environmental concern, healthier lifestyles. It brought what we call a fourth person perspective. And this is the key thing to all of it. The fourth person perspective was the ability to start to see how your own mind works. The like you could be a brilliant modern scientist and rage against somebody who disagreed with you with zero ability to ever grasp that anger may be coming from unhealed childhood. And my parents' generation, somebody told them they needed therapy. They'd think you were crazy, they'd be angry at you, and no matter how screwed up their life might have been. So with fourth person perspective, that's why there was all this interest in contemplative religions and all this personal growth stuff, and psychiatry got off the couch, and experiential depth psychology and stuff. And so it brought something new to the world, and people could start to learn to see how their own mind works, and they could heal, particularly at the level of personal healing of family of origin and stuff. And the boomer generation had this in our youth. Now in our old age, now a new one's coming in called integral. One guy likes to call it postmodern. It brings a fifth person perspective, which means you can start to see the conditioning that larger than just your family, the whole socio-political conditioning which you grew up in, which just profoundly influences us. And when you start to see this, you start to see how all these stages work. You don't just identify with a stage. And you can see the good and the bad. I mean, I can see really the positive things of the conservative, the strong family values, the rule of law, be a strong, upstanding man who takes care of your family. And, and then of course it gets, the downside. And there's a lot of downside on the left, just like MAGA is a kind of pathology of the extreme, of the traditional, the ultra vote is really a pathology of the left. And it's very obvious in the sense of you have people who are so determined that they need to be accepted and tolerated for their beliefs and their sexual identity and all this stuff, which is okay, except they're totally horribly hostile to anyone that disagrees with them. So they're it's just this. You have the hypocrisy on the left, you have the hypocrisy on the far right. So, it's what it is. So, so once it's fifth, so I mean, like you could be a good traditional person, a good traditional, say, quote, Christian, and care about your neighbors, or somebody gets hurt that care about them and maybe take them food or pray for them or whatever, that kind of thing. Boy, they heard 500,000 Iraqi children died because Clinton banned the importation of pharmaceuticals. It doesn't touch them. It's just too abstract. It's too far away. A postmodern parent hears that, oh my God, they're like children like us, like ours, and we're parents like them. It doesn't make them better people necessarily, but makes them a larger viewpoint. Mm-hmm. So with traditional, now we need the next stage. Now we just see everyone, all stages, as our people. And again, just be discriminating about healthy and unhealthy versions. And so the boomer generation, we had this, egalitarian pluralism come in our youth, and now in our old age, we have this traditional worldview coming in, which allows a deeper level of healing, and a deeper level of that healing also helps us, not deal with the society as a whole, but also in our personal lives. And, what I've learned in relationships is that, anyway, I've got in the book, I have these 26 behaviors of those living a mature, well-integrated life. And the three of the last four are about relationships. And I can tell you this for certain, that there's no absolute limit to how deep sexual pleasure, love, telepathy can be. Intimacy is open-ended, in this lifetime. And it is possible to have the most pleasurable experience you've ever had in your entire life on a somewhat regular basis. I mean, what can I say? There's I don't want to get too into the details here, but it's absolutely true. It's true in my life, and it's true in the lives of some people I know. And if we could, if I could overcome what I started with and get to this stage, that other people can. But it helps people if they know something is possible.
Yes.
It's hard to aspire to something you don't know is possible.
That is so hopeful. I love the word hope, but I like it when the meaning of it is true. And that's what it sounds like. I love also that you gave us this whole history, not just of yourself, but of the many generations that go back to before Christ and all that. And there's hope. There's always hope. And there's spirit, and there's tools to enhancing life. and growth. And people, I think, just to say, people can pick all sorts of different methods and paths to get to the truth of the radiant aging and other kinds of wonderful wonderment and things like that. And we also, hope, can be uh, open and tolerant and accepting of all those different paths and all the different methods that people use. I know some are illegal and we have to be very careful about them, but I appreciate your writing this book to tell us your wisdom because you are a brilliant man, you know that, and you have gone through trials and tribulations just like every human being in the world. And it's not that we're pathological and that something has to be fixed that's broken. Traumas certainly break us or shatter us at times, and those things need to be healed. But I really appreciate you writing this book, Randy, and talking with me about it. So tell me some more of what you would like to say.
Well, this is controversial, but I really do believe that the judicious use of these substances allows a deeper level of healing than anything else we have. And I know people are not going to like that, but all I can tell you, if you had been in my mind or I had some of these experiences, you would know that is true. And they have dangers. I mean, people can get, the reason research studies on psychedelics virtually never have problems is because they rule out people who have psychosis, in their genetics and stuff. So I mean that's important. I mean they're not good for judicious use, and so um, and any skilled facilitator will be able to sort this stuff with you. So and again, well, I like this piece of graffiti. Death is the greatest rush of all. That's why they save it for last. So if you want to, leave your mind, leave your body, leave this world, well, you will. you know,
Yeah.
you may practice run while you're living. And of course, these studies where they give psychedelics to people who are, stage 4 cancer and see the changes they go through. And there's a movie called A New Understanding the Science of Psilocybin, which tracks John Hopkins and some of the people there. And the interviews of the before and after the journeys are quite fascinating.
Tell me the name of
And
that again. Tell me the name of that again.
Understanding the Science of Psilocybin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I haven't seen
And
it.
I'm almost ready to close this, but I'm trying to think for a moment. If there's anything else and all that I want to um, go into. I don't know. Anyway, I have a website called the New Radiant Aging, and I've added stuff on that. And okay. So
I put that on in the section of description of this so people can look at your website and
okay.
also order your book. And I really am glad I asked you to do this, and I'm really glad that you agreed. And now everybody will be reading your book and learning more about how to heal and how to grow more radiant as they age. How about that?
One can hope. So
Lincoln,
I want to close on this. This idea of dealing with crises as well as you can, and meeting the end of your life with. I was just diagnosed with terminal Alzheimer's of a very aggressive form. So now I am getting to live into my own last stage and see if I can live this last stage as well as I've lived the previous ones, with all the errors and everything I've gone through and ups and downs and backs and forths. So it's interesting. I mean, we're all
it's
going to die sooner or later, but, um,
I appreciated your telling me that before we started talking on recording today, and I am so sad and sorry. And I do imagine that you will grow through this diagnosis as you have your life, which is in an amazing, enhanced and or enlightened. There's a better word for that. Precious, pure way. I think that you will, I don't know. But thank you for sharing that with us. And I do know that when Randy wrote this book, this was not going on. He just got diagnosed. And I'm so glad you finished the book and published it. Yeah.
yeah, I just hope people read it. I have had very little success trying to do social media. It's just not my genre, and I've had people try to help me. It hasn't gone far, so but
Well,
it's a miracle the book will get out there in the world more, and you know, not
yes.
aggrandizement or money, but just because you know any wisdom we can give anywhere, you know, is
I
valuable.
agree. It's like you're educating the boomer population and everyone else about what can be done and what you've done and how you've lived your life. And I really appreciate that it's full of great hope, even with your current situation going on. And please let me know if I can help you navigate any of that, that you might need a shoulder or a ear, or I'm happy to help out if there's anything I can do.
Yeah, grateful. I've really appreciated you as I've known you, and I'm at one little last piece here. I had a vision, a psychic vision while I was sober, where anyway, it's the whole thing. I drifted out into space. I was in a little envelope, kind of saran wrap, and I saw all these other beings. We formed a sphere of aliens, beings, whatever, from different societies looking on each other. Our minds melted together. And I saw that everywhere they had environmental concerns, they had political problems, all this stuff. But that's not the point. When I came back from that, what I downloaded is the key thing was that in the spiritual world, space and time don't matter. So we should never underestimate the importance of any act of kindness, healing, self healing we can be part of. So, amen.
Yes, amen is right. Thank you, Randy. I'm going to stop the recording now and hope that everybody will listen to Randy and read his book. And I'll talk with you soon. Randy, if you want to stay on, let me just stop the recording, okay?